Okay, thank you for everybody who is joining our recording, and thank you for everybody who's here with us live. This is the Autism Understanding Scotland's CPD session on transitions around education. Anytime I attend training, I always want to know who are these people and why should I be listening to them? So my name is Marion McLaughlin. I am the CEO at Autism Understanding Scotland. I am a qualified teacher. I spent just under 10 years in the classroom, everything from nursery to P7 and every stage in between, Macron time, all sorts. I'm one of the spokespersons for the Scottish Government Different Minds campaign. And if you haven't already checked out their Autism in the Social Rule Book new phase of the campaign, thoroughly recommend that you go and do that. And not just because they animated me and it's terribly cute, but it's really informative too. I'm late diagnosed autistic. It's 5 years now since I was formally identified as being autistic, and I'm the parent of an autistic child. So when I talk about autism, I talk about it from a personal perspective as somebody who is autistic, as the parent of an autistic child, and as a professional who's got roughly 2 decades worth of experience supporting autistic people in a variety of settings. Who are you, Flick?
So I am Felicity or Flick. Some of you might know me as one or the other, and I'm the senior autism practitioner at Autism Understanding Scotland. I too am late diagnosed autistic myself, and I have 2 autistic children as well. I'm a former English tutor, so have a bit of an education background, though not in the classroom. But I have also been very involved recently in the development of the Aberdeenshire Autism Strategy, which we're now past the draft stage, and the full strategy should be kind of coming out soon, which is very, very exciting.
Absolutely. Oh, that's somebody else coming in. We've got them. Thank you. So what are we going to have a chat about today? So we're going to have a look at why transitions can be difficult in the first place. And then we're going to have a look at what are the transitions in education. We're going to have a look at smaller transitions and larger transitions, because we know that a lot of places are thinking about P7 into high school and nursery to primary to nursery, those kinds of transitions too. And we're going to have a talk about how we can support those transitions for autistic. Flick, would you like to talk us through this beautiful picture?
So we really love this. This was created by Erin Human, and it explains a little bit about why transitions can be a bit tricky for us as autistic people. So as you can see in this cartoon here, hopefully most of you can see this, that when we're focused on something, it feels a bit like our mind is sending out lots of little tendrils of thought, which expands into all of the thoughts and feelings. So, you know, if I am doing, for instance, work emails, then all of my kind of work email tendrils are kind of coming out. And yeah, I'm sort of thinking about the way that I'm using language around those work emails. I'm thinking about all the different tasks that I'm currently doing and what I will be doing next and everything. When I need to switch tasks, I need time to then bring in all of those tendrils again, you know, to like finish up the email that I'm currently working on, to try and remember where I got to so that I remember next time I come along, to sort of pack away some of those thoughts and feelings that I was experiencing dealing with those emails and things. So yeah, you need to retract them in, and that can take a bit of time actually to kind of track them in, and then also to then send out the tendrils for the next task, for the next thing that I'm going to be doing. So eventually you can then shift to that new task. But when we're interrupted, or we need to switch really abruptly, when, you know, suddenly one of my kids just shouts, Mom, I need you, and I have to just leave the emails in the middle of doing them, it feels like all those tendrils are getting ripped out instead of me being able to retract them in naturally and neatly into my head. They're just being ripped out, and that's why we might not react very well to that, you know. So if an autistic child is in the middle of doing something at school and then suddenly they have to switch task without any warning, without being able to kind of pack away all those thoughts and feelings they had associated with the task that they're doing to find a natural conclusion, you know, but instead they're just told, no, you have to leave that immediately and move on to the next thing. that's really difficult, actually. That can feel incredibly uncomfortable for us, and so we need some time in order to transition onto that next thing. And we're going to be hopefully giving you lots and lots of ways to do that today throughout the PowerPoint.
But it does really feel, you know, as an autistic person, like whenever I get really involved in something, it feels like the rest of the world just melts away, and it's just me and the things that I'm doing. And the thought of other things going on, they just completely vanish if I'm that engrossed in it. Yeah. So no
Yeah.
wonder it can be difficult for us to then sort of transition on, can't it?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
And it's really important. We always want people to recognize that there are lots of things going on for the child outside of school as well. And there could be a lot of transitions going on there, which can impact and influence what's going on inside of school. And some of them, you know, absolutely sure that you'll be very aware. And, you know, as a former primary 7 teacher myself, I was very aware of how many of them were going through puberty. But some of them might also be moving house at the same time as being in school, parents breaking up, parents getting, step family. So, you know, new people coming into the family, new siblings can be really tricky. And I do remember one autistic pupil that I supported. It was whenever mum fell pregnant with a second sibling, with her third baby. And that's whenever it was a little bit more obvious that the child started presenting more obviously autistically, because he was dealing with all these transitions all over the place. A death in the family can be a really, really tricky one. And I think autistic grieving is something that we could spend an entire section just talking about. The way that we grieve as autistic people might not be the same as the way that you see other people grieving, and then that can add on additional stress as well if that's not understood. Illness or disability, them or a loved one. I mean, at any point, anybody could come down with an illness or become disabled in some way or another. I know a lot of autistic people, they're not just autistic. We're not just autistic. We might have dyspraxia, dyslexia, ADHD. A lot of autistic people have hypermobility. There's all sorts of other things that can be going on as well, Flick, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're more likely to have other neurodivergencies. We're more likely to have co-occurring conditions and things than your general population. So there's a high chance that there's more going on than us just being autistic.
Yeah. Moving to a new town can be tricky. And, you know, if you're moving to a new town, that can mean starting a new class. And in the middle of the year, that can be a very, very difficult thing to be doing as well, because parents don't always move to new towns during summer holidays, do they? Sometimes they have to do that midterm. Getting your autism diagnosis can be a big transition as well, can't it, Blake?
Yeah, and I think as well that the age that happens can sometimes play a big part as to how big a deal it is. You know, if you've got a very, very young child, quite often they don't have as many preconceived ideas about what autism is. You know, they don't have those stereotypes already in their mind, so it might not really phase them one way or another, although it might for some. You know, it is a very individual thing. But particularly for kids who are kind of just approaching or going through puberty, where it's that age where you need to fit in because you don't want to be the one standing out because that's social death, it can be particularly difficult to find out that you're autistic at that kind of stage of life. And that can be a massive transition, and it can be quite difficult at that point to support that child through that, can't it?
Yeah, and it's so important that they find out about autism in a really positive manner so that they can then feel good about themselves and their differences. And I think a lot of schools are doing better job at that, aren't they? And a lot of families. Getting a new pet, I mean, it might seem like a small thing, but if you've got a puppy at home and you're worried about how it's getting on, then that can make it difficult for you to be focusing on anything else, can't it? Especially if that's a dog or, you know, another animal that's going to be trained up as an emotional support pet. And then you might be developing quite a strong bond with it really quite quickly. Parents' job changing could mean all sorts of different things, couldn't it?
I mean, that might mean that now you're going to different after school care than you were getting before. You might not be going straight home to see mum or dad. Might be going to grannies. You might be going to a childminders or something. It can mean that you've got different levels of income coming in. Might be more, might be less. It can kind of actually have a lot of far-reaching changes, can't it?
Oh, very much so. And I think relationship changes can be incredibly hard. And I think this is, where puberty and friendship and relationship changes can all kind of fit in. A lot of autistic people that we know kind of manage not too bad at primary school, although some don't. But whenever socially, we mean, and then whenever it gets to secondary school and you're not running around playing tag anymore, you're expected to stand around and talk to your friends instead of playing games. That can be really difficult transition for an awful lot of autistic people. I remember some of my friends in secondary having to explain to me why we weren't playing tag anymore in secondary. And I was like, well, this just seems really silly because we all enjoyed it 6 weeks ago. So why aren't we still enjoying it now? So sometimes there's all these unwritten rules around changing friendships and, relationships with peers that non-autistic people seem to pick up really naturally. But a lot of us who are autistic may need a little bit of that spelled out at times, mightn't we? In a gentle way.
Yeah. And sort of making sure that we understand, non-autistic communication, but also that the non-autistic kind of peers understand autistic communication can really help with that a lot, can't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. But everyday transitions in education. Do you want to take that top line? Or if your throat gets sore or anything,
I'll let you know. Yeah. So
I'm gonna ask you to talk too much.
Everyday transitions. So, those kind of smaller transitions that we might be going through, but we might expect to happen day after day after day. So that's things like coming into school, and you might be having to walk through quite a noisy sort of cacophony of lots of other pupils in order to actually get into the school as well. So there can be added sensory elements there that can be quite tricky. And actually just even that transition, that initial transition into school can be really, really hard for a lot of autistic pupils. So yeah, that's a massive one. But even sort of going to the toilet, that's a transition as well, having to stop what you're doing, sort of bring in those tendrils, dealing with the work that you were looking at, leaving the classroom, going and finding the toilet, which is going to have a whole different sensory feel to it, and then coming back again. But yeah, stopping for a snack, stopping for break time, stopping for lunch as well. Again, that's another transition. And getting ready to go outside, because again, you're going to have to deal with a lot of different sensory stuff at that point. Are you having to put on wellies or different shoes or something? Are you having to put on a jacket? What does that jacket feel like? What does that jacket smell like? What's the weather going to be like outside? Is it hotter out there because it's summer than it is inside? Is it colder? Is it raining? So there's an awful lot actually going on when you're just getting ready to walk out the door, and it can seem very simple to other people, but it can actually be quite a big deal to a lot of us, can't it?
Oh gosh, so much. And I do remember teaching a wee girl who said that she didn't like going outside when it was windy because it made her feel sad. And I think her sensory sort of sensitivities to that were really valid, and it was so important that we listened to her. And she was we arranged it so that she could still play inside. Anybody else who wanted to play inside, so then we had a bit more of a free flow for people who wanted to go on the days when it wasn't too windy. Totally fine, absolutely love being outside. But it's recognizing and supporting those differences, but coming back in again as well. Do you know that feeling whenever it's winter and your house is cold and you need to go for a shower, and the thought of like getting undressed and it's just awful, and then you get into the shower and it's lovely and warm, and then as soon as you get in there you think, okay, I live here now, I'm never getting out the shower again. It can feel like that sometimes for autistic people, can't it, whenever we're trying to make those transitions from those different temperatures. And getting changed for gym, there's a lot of executive functioning that's required in that. Where's my PE kit? Remembering where you put everything, finding a space where you're not going to be overwhelmed by everybody, and the actual going around and changing. And for some autistic people who struggle with small hand movements, you know, with fine motor skills, that can be a really, really tricky thing as well. Moving from one task to another. So yeah, I finished my reading group. Now I need to go and do some art, or I finished my reading group. Now I need to go and, you know, write a story. That transition from one task on to another, and then packing away the finishing the reading, and then completely switching around to be doing a different task altogether can be really hard. And I remember, again, whenever I was teaching, sometimes it was not too bad when we were doing maths first thing and then language up to, you know, mid-afternoon, up to lunchtime. But then in the afternoon, we might do 2 different tasks, and switching between those tasks could be really, really tricky for them. Even moving to a different room as well, because again, there's the leaving one area, turning around corners, maybe going upstairs, all of these things, right?
Yeah, no, it's again, it can seem like such a small thing to other people, but to us that can be a really big thing. And especially if that means that, you know, you're kind of moving through the corridor at a busy time when lots of other people are also moving to a different classroom. So you've got all of that sensory information going on, where you might be bumping past people, as well as all the noise and everything. And, you know, maybe you have the bell going off as well. That's a lot. That's you know, a lot to be processing. And we process that sensory information very differently, and we tend to process it for much longer. We don't kind of filter it all out in the same way as other people do. So that can be a huge one as well. And yeah, little things like changing the coloring pencil that you're using, you know, moving on to the next color. You might find that some autistic kids in kind of lower primary school, or even through to secondary school, might want to color everything in one color. And you're like, okay, you know, you want to try using a different color now, but no, you know, and that might actually be because it's that transition. You know, they found a color, they like that color, they like the feel of the way that pencil is moving across the paper. You know, sometimes they catch a bit, whereas sometimes they glide nicely. And so if they found one that they're really enjoying, might actually be a bit anxiety inducing to change to another one. And what if they pick another one and then another kid grabs the one that they've been using and they can't get it back if they change their mind? And, you know, like there can actually be a lot going on there that you wouldn't necessarily realize. So yeah,
there's politics at the table when you're managing who's using what coloring pencil. There really is, isn't there?
Yeah. And I don't think, like, you know, sometimes adults kind of forget that, you know, that when you were a kid, actually these things were huge, because it was your whole world at that point. But yeah, things like a substitute teacher coming in, or maybe specialist staff coming in to do a certain lesson, whether it's like an art teacher or a music teacher or something as well. And so yeah, that's trying to figure out their communication style, whether they're actually going to be listening to us and understanding and everything. They're going to have a whole different kind of style of teaching. You know, I know kids who maybe have a newly qualified teacher, and so one day a week, when they're off kind of doing their thing, they've got a different member of staff in, and yeah, and then that's difficult. That change, you know, through the week, even if it's happening every week, can be really hard. So yeah, transitions, just anything where you're stopping one thing and you're starting another thing. There is a good scope there for autistic pupils to actually be really struggling with that and to need that bit of extra support with it, which we will definitely be covering through this, don't worry.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we always like to do is make sure that people feel really, you know, empowered to make a change. So here we go. We've got a few slides on how we can support that transition. So I think for me, somebody who's quite demand avoidant, what's the purpose of the transition? Why do I have to do the transition? You know, why do I have to go? I am so enjoying my painting. Why do I have to go to the toilet? Well, because if I don't go to the toilet now, then I'm gonna have to, you know, change my clothes later if I have a toileting accident. You know, why do I have to change to a different lesson? So because that's another part of the curriculum, it's something else that's really important. If I want to be doing a certain career whenever I grow up, this is the one that I do need to have in order to get into my university course. So, you know, and it also the purpose of it doesn't always have to be something that's high and lofty like that. The purpose can be fun. The purpose could be because you enjoy the next thing. If the transition is on to lunch or break time, And then the purpose can be because you're going to focus an awful lot more after you've got some food in your belly. The purpose can be you're getting kind of hangry now, so let's see if we can get you a snack, so then that'll help sustain you. So explaining the purpose of the transition can really make a big difference, and that goes for large transitions as well, doesn't it? But it can really help. An advance notice of when the lesson, the activity, whatever the visit is going to end can be really handy. And we will talk about, you know, sort of creating guides for people as well. But if I'm out on a class trip, for example, and we are going to be in this part of the castle until 11 o'clock, then we're going to have a snack up until about 11:30. Then we're going to have a play in the playground, and then we're going to be back in school for that. You know, letting them know when each of these things are going to happen. And for some kids, they'll need to know like half an hour in advance. Some of them will want to know everything that's happening. That's where the timetables could be really useful for the entire day. And for some children, sort of little regular reminders, like, it's 5 minutes and then we're going to change to this. Okay, it's 2 minutes and then we're going to change. Just another wee minute and then we're going to change. So these things can be really handy, can't they, Flick?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry, I was in the middle of replying to a private message there that somebody sent through. So if you just keep me up to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Timers can be really handy as well. And I think a timer helps to depersonalize something, because it's not you that's saying that you have to stop the job. It's the timer. Timer has said that it's time for us to go. And I think whenever you involve an autistic person in choosing how they want to do these transitions, and they might then ask for, you know, timers if that's something that they really work with. And we know some autistic kids who'd be like, right, Mum, can you put on a timer for 10 minutes and then we'll leave the park? Because then there's, you know, that comfort, that security, right? That the timer is the one. And then whenever the timer goes off, you might have 10 last swings and then you're off. So and allowing that, you know, that choice really helps. Visual prompts. Sorry, you okay now, Flick?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, visual prompts can be really useful, and there's different ways that you can use visual prompts as well, because a visual prompt might be like a little kind of cartoon picture representing the next thing that you're going on to. It might be that sort of you know, a bit like with the next one we've got like a visual timetable kind of idea, or it might be like an actual photo of the next thing, if that's going to work better for the child, or even an object to show them that what they're going on to, you know, sort of showing them their lunch bag because it's going to be lunchtime, you know. And so sort of, you know, are you going to be going and doing arts and crafts? Can you actually have the pens out ready to show them that? So there are different ways that you can have these visual prompts, and it's going to be very individual, because we're not all cookie cutter, you know, kind of cutouts of each other. We're not a homogenous group. We are very individual. So sometimes a bit of trial and error is needed to figure out what's going to work best for an individual child. But there are sort of different ways that you can have these visual prompts, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people seem to think that, you know, visual means like a picture, but sometimes just a list or bullet points can be really, really handy. And I think especially if you've got somebody who's hyperlexic, they might actually find it easier to be reading the words rather than sort of trying to decode a picture. But some people who struggle with reading may prefer the picture to trying to decode the words that they find is really, really tricky. So it's very much got to be tailored to that specific individual. And yeah, quite a lot of autistic children do teach themselves how to read in nursery if they are hyperlexic. Yeah, I do know a few parents who would come in to pick their child up in nursery and find them posed up in the library corner reading books to their peers. Now, they probably would benefit from like a bullet pointed list instead. So it's really very much up to that individual. Choice and control is absolutely key as well. So what is it that I'm going on to? Can I choose? Do I have some say in what it is that I'm transitioning onto? Right. Yes, I have to go outside, or it's break time. Do I have to go outside? Or is there somewhere inside that I can go instead if I find outside a little bit overwhelming? Yep, it is snack time. Have I chosen my snack? Have I gone to the tuck shop and made sure that it's something that I'm really confident with? Or, you know, did I choose it from my family before I came into school? Can right, yeah, I'm finished the spelling job. Do I have to do reading or can I do writing instead next? So, making sure that they have that choice so that they have to transition onto something for sure. But can they have a say in what it is that they're transitioning onto and how they do that transition? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think making sure that they have all the information they need. Like, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, because how often do we ask questions, and how much information do we typically need compared to our peers?
A lot of questions.
Yeah, we tend to need more information than other people, and that shouldn't ever be kind of thought to mean that we're somehow lacking in our understanding or our capabilities or anything. Often it just means that we need that reassurance. It often is because of that difference in communication style that autistic people have. So sometimes, when you think you've answered a question, actually the question we were asking, you haven't quite covered it. So giving us all of the information that we need, and some autistic kids won't need lots and lots. So again, it's a very, very kind of personal, individual thing. But if we are seeking more information, then making sure you can provide that, and that you can answer all those questions, and understand that we're not just asking to be a pain in your backside, basically. It is genuinely because we need that information to feel like we're ready to then move on to that next thing.
I think as well, if you have somebody who's autistic who's asking the same question over and over again about the transition, it can be really handy to use that same language back. So when are we having lunch? 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 And if you keep on saying 12:15, 12:15, 12:15, 12:15, and they're still asking the question over and over again, it can sometimes be really handy to say, we're having lunch at 12:15. And saying, right, is there anywhere else that we can write that down? Can I put that down on a post-it note for you as well? Can we pop it up on the board? Is there any other way that we can help? And sort of just be understanding. I know that, myself as an autistic adult, I'll sometimes ask the same question over and over again, and it is just for reassurance more than anything else. The transitions can be tricky. Let's see. Joining in the activity to help find a natural conclusion can be really handy as well. So if, for example, you have somebody who's autistic who is very engaged in drawing a picture. So perhaps they've finished their tasks and you've let them do a little bit of art, and they're really, really enjoying it, but it's almost lunchtime. So what I would do in that situation is go up and sort of say, "Hiya, Susan. Let's have a look at this. Wow, that's really interesting. Can you tell me about this part of your picture? What's that? Oh, where did you get that idea from?" And then really share their attention before helping them to find a really natural concluding point. So can they finish colouring in Italy if it's a world map that they're doing? Do they want to finish colouring Italy? Right, and then once Italy's finished, maybe we can go and get some lunch. And then that's when letting them know when they can return to the activity can really help. Because knowing that we have to go away from the activity is one thing, and that can be really distressing if we don't know when we can get to finish it off. Because this comic book, this picture, this story that they're doing might be really, really, really important to them. So can they go back to it after lunchtime? Can they get half an hour to finish it off after lunchtime? Can they come in during lunchtime to finish it off if they're really excited about it? Can they take it home to finish it off there? When can they go back to that task so that they can complete it as well? Because knowing when you can go back to it and then sticking to it. If you've said that, yes, you can come in during lunchtime so you can finish off your world map, then you have to make sure that they then can, so that you're keeping that trust.
Absolutely.
So, like, have you anything to add on to those ones?
Yeah, no, I think that's all good information there. And then special interest. I mean, special interest can be used in a whole variety of ways to support autistic people in general, because they are really important for our mental health. So these are those things, those passions that we have, that we are just really connected to, that we're really interested in, that we maybe kind of want to tell you all about, all of the details about. So those special interests are really good for our mental health, actually, but they can be used to support those transitions. can you use something connected to that special interest in order to actually, you know, convince them to kind of move on to that next task? If they're having to leave for lunch, but they've got a special interest in dinosaurs and they're going to get to use their dinosaur water bottle at lunch, that might be a good you know, way to try and actually show them that, yeah, no, I know that it's going to be difficult leaving this activity, but it's brilliant because there's something positive to look forward to here. You know, can you actually ask them some information about their special interest, let them do a little bit of info dumping on their special interest whilst you're transitioning from one activity to the other, to bring down their anxiety levels, you know, as they're maybe having to transition to a different space in the school or something like that. So tapping into those passions that we have, which already really help us with emotional regulation and things, that can be a really effective way, can't it, I think, of helping to support those transitions too.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then, yeah, giving extra time to process if needed as well. And I have actually seen some really good practice going out into schools where this has been really put into practice, where a transition was occurring and one of the children asked if sort of just kind of whilst they were transitioning, and this is kind of combining the special interest and the giving extra time to process, if they could show the teacher like 30-second presentation on a special interest that they had on the computer, and the teacher let them, and it worked so beautifully, and it really helped with that transition. They were going to PE actually, and it was a PE teacher who'd clearly built up a really good relationship with this particular kid, and so yeah, in sort of just and it was only about 30 seconds. It really didn't take very long, but it clearly gave that kid just time to process what it was they were going to be transitioning to, as well as really helping them because it was a special interest kind of connection that they had there. So that was really beautiful to see that. But sometimes you're just going to need to let them just sit, just take in the fact that there's going to be a transition, just give them a bit of extra time maybe to finish up with the work that they are doing. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to stop. It just means that they need that bit of extra time. And it might be kind of linked back to one of those other ones we discussed, where they just need to finish a particular, you know, bit that they're coloring in, or finish answering a certain question or something before they feel like they're able to do that transition. So sometimes giving a bit of extra time can be really, really useful as well.
I mean, I know a lot of autistic adults, whenever they've driven home from work, might sit in the car for a few minutes before they then transition into the house, you know, because just taking that time to process, then sort of move on to the other, just it can really help at times, can't it?
Absolutely.
But yeah, moving on to the next room before peers, that's a really key one, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that can be a really good one. And again, sometimes that can kind of get rid of that bustly corridor, you know, difficult sensory experience. If they are finding it difficult transitioning from one room to another, when everybody else in the school is also in the middle of transitioning, and there's loads of noise, there's loads of other kids with different textures, you know, sort of brushing past them, lots of visual disturbance going on there with everybody kind of moving around and everything. So sometimes just being able to have that transition happen when it's not the same time that everybody else is moving around can be really useful. So getting to just go a couple of minutes before everybody else is moving classroom, that can be a really kind of useful one as well, can't it? And then sometimes maybe taking a support object as well. I don't have my emotional support Raven with me today, but
I have an emotional support porg in my office, which is incredibly cute, but yes.
So, you know,
Raven not in your office.
Yeah, and even as adults, yeah, a lot of us like to have these little kind of objects that just help bring anxiety down, or maybe just kind of give us a little bit of joy or something. So sometimes having a support object can be really useful. I've known kids in nursery whose parents have like sewn the nursery badge onto a version of their favorite toy. They've sort of bought an extra one and made them a little kind of nursery jumper to take with them every day, to help with that kind of transition out of the home and things like that. So sometimes those sorts of objects can be really, really useful as well, and can help with that emotional regulation. And then
sometimes they can be quite unusual objects, right?
Oh yeah, no,
Sometimes,
sometimes it might not be like a toy. It might be, you know, like a specific book, for instance. It might be like a particular pencil, or it can be all sorts of weird and wonderful things. A cushion. I knew one kid who had a particular pillow that they needed to take with them everywhere for a while. You know, it could be anything.
Mhm. Oh, definitely. Peer support can make such a difference as well. So if you know that you've got other peers who are sort of doing the same transition at the same time as you, then that can help. So yes, Susan, you can go to lunch 5 minutes before everybody else. That's not a problem. So you can get to move through the corridor. You can maybe take a support object. Do you want to take a best friend with you, or like a good friend with you? So then they can start that lunch at the same time as you as well. Then that can be really, that can be very, very helpful too. Do you maybe have a little room where all the autistic kids can go if that's where they want to at some point, you know, maybe a little autistic lunch club perhaps? And, you know, then those things can provide you a little bit of extra peer support, can't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, let me move on.
Oh yeah. So now we've got a case study as well for you to actually have a little think about, and you can feel free to use the chat for this bit as well, for kind of giving some suggestions, because we'd really love to actually hear some suggestions from you in real time there. But yeah, this is Annabelle, isn't it? So
Hello, Annabelle.
Annabelle is 11 years old, and it's almost time for lunch, but Annabelle struggles with the noise in the lunch hall, and she also struggles with the busyness of the corridors as well. So yeah, kind of using the chat there, to maybe give some suggestions. How do you think we could help support Annabelle to access lunch a bit more easily? And we are putting you on the spot, but you know, I'm sure you do this to some of your pupils as well, so you should be used to it.
Well, I did give a couple of suggestions just before we moved on to this, didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
Using a
Oh yeah.
timetable to allow her to see, allow her to leave the class early. Yeah. Allowing her access food early and then go to a safe space elsewhere. Perhaps you can go to lunch before everyone else and take ear defenders. So if her leave slightly before or after the other kids, yeah, leaving a little bit early. Yeah. I think leaving that at a slightly different time really does make a big difference for some kids, doesn't it?
Yeah, that can really help, because you know, some of them will actually be able to cope with the noise in the lunch hall if, like people have said, you know, they have ear defenders, or they've at least sort of missed that really busy flow, and so they've managed to get there ahead of time. Others, as other people have suggested, might really benefit from having a different space where they can eat their lunch. Yeah, having those visual timetables so that she knows exactly when it's coming up and happening might be useful, as well, and having that regular seat in the dining hall. I like that idea, because it might be that there is
That's a great idea.
bit, yeah, there's a space where it's not quite as noisy, and you know, a lot of autistic kids will like to have their back to the wall. They don't want to kind of be feeling like they're in the middle of the room with everybody looking at them. So if especially if it's a seat that she's been able to pick out as, yeah, this is the seat where I feel like I'm comfortable sitting in the lunch hall, then yeah, that's really good.
I think a lot of autistic people do something called perimeter checking. So we might sort of like go around about the perimeter at break time and at lunch times, because that's just a sensory, more easy place to be. And I have seen in one school that I've visited recently, a lot of dining halls can be really echoey because they're so big. And in this particular school, yes, they've got a regular space, but also they've got a little area where they've really dropped down the ceiling a lot lower. So should be a much quieter area for them, if that's where they want to go. Some
Yeah.
super ideas here, weren't there, Flip?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, yeah, providing a different space is definitely an option. And it might be that they're allowed to pick a buddy to go with them to eat lunch in that different space as well. It might be that you've got a few kids who struggle with that main big hall. I know that when we've been out to schools recently, I, as an adult, have really struggled actually with some of those dining
Oh,
halls.
yeah.
They can be very, it's not just the noise, it can also be all the smells of all the different meals as well, and there's a lot going on. So yeah, kind of
We
having
did a training session last year where the staff went to the lunch hall to have a break. and they said that we were welcome to join them there. And you and I very politely declined because it was far too noisy. And we went back to the room that we'd delivered the training in previously because it was a much quieter space.
Yeah.
So I think if it's okay for us, then it's definitely okay for others as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've had a little look at smaller transitions. Here are some of the bigger transitions that we can go through, and some of them are really common ones that people sort of think of. But starting nursery to begin with is absolutely huge. Moving from nursery up to primary can be a very, very big transition. Primary to secondary that's an enormous transition, isn't it?
Yeah, much bigger building a lot of the time, and very different kind of setup to your day and different peer groups. It's huge, yeah. But as is leaving secondary as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, moving to a new year group. Sorry.
Yeah, new year group can be really difficult, especially if the people in your class are changing. I found that transition when I was in high school, that transition from S2 to S3 was quite tricky because I was then going into different classes with a whole bunch of other children that I didn't know, that I'd never worked with before, and I didn't know what that was going to be like. So that was a really difficult one, having had pretty much the same kids for a long time.
Yeah, you've had that consistency, and then it changes, which again, moving to a new school is massive. I know that I had that when I was about 10. I moved from sort of southeast England up to up near here actually, and yeah, it was huge, a really big change, because the size of school that I was at was completely different. Everybody had very different accents, I really didn't know what to expect. It was very anxiety inducing, and it took me a little while to kind of really get settled in that new school. But even moving to a new class, that can be a tricky one as well. Change of teaching staff as well, especially if you've formed a really good bond with sort of staff members previously, having someone new come in and not knowing whether they're going to have the same rules as the previous teacher, whether they're going to be more or less strict, what to expect from them. That can be absolutely huge as well, can't it?
Yeah, so it's one thing to have a different teacher for a day, but it's a completely, there were times when I was teaching when a colleague would go off on maternity leave, and then somebody else would take over the class for the rest of the year. And I did that with one of my P7 classes, and it was a huge transition for the kids and for me as well. Oh, a friend leaving class can be a really difficult one, especially if they don't have a wide friendship group, and it's that one friend who's leaving for whatever reason. And we have had, Kent as well has recently moved to a brand new school building. Other schools we know have moved to new school buildings. So moving from one school building to another, even if the new building is shiny and all beautiful and is better set up for whatever reason, whenever you transition to a new school, there's all new protocols that you're going to go through. Things might change a little bit. Not everything is going to be the same as it was. So there might be a whole bunch of things that get, rather than just the new building, there's going to be a whole bunch of changes to the routine, isn't there?
Yeah, and new buildings tend to have very strong smells as well, because often they've been painted and things. So there's a lot of very kind of fumey kind of smells going around as well, which can contribute to our anxiety and our kind of sensory differences and everything as well. And change of head teacher is huge, isn't it? Because they tend to be the ones that set the ethos for the whole rest of the school. They actually have like quite a big impact on all of the staff and even all the pupils as well, don't they? So that can be a really, really big one.
Change of curriculum can be a tricky one, and I do remember sort of being in a primary school when we were moving from 5 to 14 to the curriculum for excellence, and it did take a while for everybody to get their heads around, because if you're used to sharing learning intentions and all of a sudden they're quite different, that can be a massive big one. Returning to school after holiday, going on holiday and then returning to school after holidays, both of these things are really, really big, because it's a massive change to your entire routine. You don't see your friends as much over the holidays as you do, or maybe you see them more depending on the friend and whether or not they're in the same school. That can be an absolutely huge transition, something that can take some autistic people couple of weeks before they get into the swing of it, can't they?
Until they're settled again. Absolutely. And then we will be talking more about this as well, but returning to school after school phobia. So if that school has had that child has had school-based anxiety, if they've really struggled and they've ended up being out of education for a time period, and then they're coming back to school again, that's massive, isn't it? That's an absolutely huge one.
It really is. And do feel free to use the chat if you can think of any others, because we know that this is not by any means an exhaustive list, but there's only so much that we can put in with the time that we have available. So we thought we would add in as much as we possibly could. But all of these things are absolutely huge, big transitions. And they can all sort of mean big emotional responses sometimes from some pupils. So how can we support the transition? So, what can we do? So an ND guide, what on earth is an ND guide, right? A neurodivergent affirming guide is what we used to sort of term social stories. I think social stories can be incredibly useful. And I think for a lot of autistic children, they can work really well. However, within the autistic community, they haven't exactly got the best reputation because of the way that they've been used. For a long time, it hasn't always been done appropriately. And even when they have been used appropriately, social stories have a very strict structure that you're expected to be following. And not every autistic person needs that every time. So it's really a neurodivergent guide is more working with the autistic person to figure out what is the information they need, what's the way that they want it presented, and then working together to make that information accessible for them. So some autistic students that we know really love a video. So, can you make a video of you and the student together talking about that transition, what it means that they can then watch back? You write a little story about it. Do you want to bullet point it? Whatever is going to work best for that student. And that might mean videos of a new setting. That could be photographs of the new setting. And it might be something that needs updated kind of regularly. So, as a parent, my child is going to be transitioning up to secondary school next year, not this academic year, but in the next academic year. And it'll be very much, what is it that you want? What do you need? What's the information that's important to you? And making sure that it's a living document, so that if you get halfway through primary 7 and they've suddenly got extra questions, great, let's go back and we'll answer those questions, and then we'll add that into that document, so then we can update it, we can make it there. And that kind of goes hand in hand with as many advanced visits as required. And when I was teaching primary 7, we had an excellent scheme where every Wednesday morning, the students would go up to their high school so they could get very much used to being in that setting, being in that environment, sort of working with the teachers that they were going to be working in when they were in S1, navigating their way around a much bigger building. They know the smells, they know where the toilets are, they know how to sort of, use their record cards and all the rest of it. So then they feel really confident going up. And that, I think, worked really beautifully, because at the end of the year, I did sort of say to them, right, folks, who's feeling really confident about starting secondary school? And almost every single pupil said that they were feeling really confident and quite comfortable with it. All the mystery out of that transition had been gone, it had been taken away. And they felt really empowered to make that transition, and they knew what they were doing.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I think photos and video guides we've kind of touched on, haven't we, Flick?
Yeah, but sometimes it kind of goes hand in hand with needing all that information. So if we can have photos of the new spaces that we're going to be going to, then that's brilliant. Sometimes photos taken by the pupils themselves can be really good as well. A video guide, quite often during COVID, I know that a lot of schools kind of recorded like a video guide of the school for kids who were having to transition when they weren't able to go and do those advanced visits and things. So quite a lot of schools now have that, actually, and if you do have that as an option, that's a really good one to send, because that can be watched over and over and over again, so that's really useful. Maps as well.
I know some secondary schools have also done that with existing students. Like you're in first year, second year, there's going to be a bunch of new first years, let's make a video for them so then they know what they're coming into, and that's worked really well. But yeah, Matt, Sorry,
Yeah,
I
that
love a good map.
actually, well, I really panicked actually when I moved up to secondary school as a child, and I was really worried about finding my way around the new school. So having a map that I could hold on to was really good. Having had it, you know, well in advance would have been even better, so that I could have studied it as well. Because yeah, I always like a good map, and I often check Google Maps before I'm going to be going somewhere new, whether that's kind of walking or driving. So yeah, always good. Before Google Maps, I used to have an A to Z with me everywhere I went. I went to uni in Glasgow, and I had my mini Glasgow A to Z that I took everywhere with me as a student. Information passports as well, they can be really handy ones, can't they, to hold on to, so that you've got and this very much needs to be kind of made with the pupil, with the student as well, so that they can decide what information they actually want to be passed on, and that can
We do have one on our website for people to download as well if they would like.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got one in our downloadable document section on our information hub there. So yeah, we've got kind of various sections that can be filled in, including things like what are your special interests, because that's really important. And you know, we keep coming back to it, but multiple opportunities to ask questions. It's a really good one, isn't it?
There's always another question. Like, we get an answer to one thing and then that pops up another question in our brain an awful lot of the time. And then I think sometimes, you know, a lot of autistic people will watch TV or movies or read a book to get some more information about the transition. So they might want to see fictional people doing this transition, and then they might sort of be confident that they've got all their questions answered, then go and watch an episode of SpongeBob or something where something similar happens, and then all of a sudden they've got another question that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So having the opportunity to sort of check in a little bit regularly if there's a big transition coming up is really handy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then yeah, building in some downtime as well, because a lot of these things can be very overwhelming, and sometimes we just need some processing time, maybe some time to immerse ourselves in our special interests as well, just to kind of process it all, and kind of get us back on an even keel afterwards as well.
That makes such a difference, doesn't it? Yeah. When you're so other ideas for supporting this transition is revisiting and supporting the sensory needs. The transition between primary and secondary, quite often coinciding with puberty, does mean that a lot of autistic people's sensory needs might be changing. So some autistic people, whenever they get their assessment, they maybe get their formal identification, some might do some work on learning what their sensory profile is and how to do it. And some of you might be working on sort of sensory diets from occupational therapy, which is super, that's brilliant. But whenever we have big hormonal changes, like puberty, like pregnancy, like you might even have with some older secondary students, our sensory profile can change enormously. And what used to be really comfortable or comforting, what used to be amazing for us, can suddenly become completely intolerable. So revisiting those sensory needs to make sure that the strategies that you've got for supporting the student are actually the ones that they need still is a really, really good idea. And you know, part of I think it's the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, talks about the respect for the evolving capacities of disabled people. So what somebody was capable of in primary 7, they might be capable of something different in S1, S2, S3. You know, sometimes they might be more capable. Sometimes if they're burnt out, then they might be a little bit less. So that respect for that evolving capacity really is sort of fitted in, because who we are one day to the next it's not always uniform, isn't it? Sometimes what we're capable of doing, what our sensory profile is, these things can change quite significantly. So having a couple of backup options, like, okay, so on a good day, we can do this. On a day that you're really struggling, we can do that. So then they know that the support that they can get from you is as flexible as their needs are. And special interest, I think we've kind of talked about using the special interest anyway.
Yeah, we've kind of covered how that can be a really, really useful one, and it can really help with bonding. You know, if you are kind of struggling to bond with a pupil who's going through a transition, then asking them about their special interest is often a a really good way of kind of finding that in as well. Information about what the change will mean, you know, what things are actually changing, how's that going to look. We've already kind of covered how important it is to give us as much information as we need, which will vary greatly between one individual and the next. But consistency of support is a really good one. You know, can there actually be a member of staff who is, I mean, in an ideal world, having a PSA who's actually transferring from, you know, primary school up to secondary school with that pupil. We have seen that happen, and it can be amazing when it does. But we do appreciate that, you know, sometimes there are restraints on these things, on what's actually practical. But, you know, is there somebody who can actually sort of build up that bond from maybe the secondary school ahead of time, so that then they're getting that consistency when they move up to secondary school? They've already got a person that they know, you know, right, if I've got any questions, I go to, you know, maybe that's going to be their guidance teacher, maybe that's going to be their registration teacher, you know, maybe it's just a teacher who teaches a subject that they're particularly interested in. It will vary depending on, you know, your staffing levels and things like that. But yeah, if you can somehow make it so that there's that consistency, so that there's a familiar face, so that there's somebody that they know already ahead of time, I mean, that can be absolutely massive, can't it?
It really can. I do remember whenever I took over the P7 class halfway through the year, you know, what we did was they had me in and doing some supporting with that class for, you know, a few periods a week for a couple of weeks beforehand. So then they could see me and their teacher working together, so that I knew that their approaches, some of my approaches for some things were a little bit different at times. And I always made sure that for those that were different, I explained why. So it wasn't just, here's an arbitrary change and I'm not explaining it. It's like, okay, so we're going to do this, and this is the reason why I'm doing it in a slightly different way. Totally understand your last teacher did something different. This is what I need as well. And what else do you need? And so we had that conversation with each other over how we can best support each other with the transition, because some of the teaching staff in some schools are autistic themselves. So you need to think about their needs whenever they're transitioning too, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think support objects we have covered as well. Mental health support, if they require it, can be really useful, especially if they've got particularly high anxiety, potentially depression, if they're burnt out, if they maybe have disordered eating, which can be attached to the transition. Then getting appropriate mental health support, that sort of affirming their identity as autistic people and sort of understanding where they're coming from, that can make a huge big difference, can't it?
Yeah, no, that's a really key one. And that's one way to avoid having that school phobia as well, is really getting anything like that into place ahead of time, you know, before that child is really hitting full crisis. If you think that this is something that's going to be useful, seeing if it can be accessed before it gets to that, you know, kind of really bad stage. And cross-setting peer support as well. So again, much like with the kind of teacher idea, you know, can pupils from the secondary school visit with autistic pupils from primary schools, you know, or can the primary school pupils go up to visit with some of the older autistic kids that are there, and they can maybe explain, you know, look, see, when it's lunchtime, actually I found that coming and having and eating my lunch here is much more accessible for me, because, you know, that main bit there is really noisy, but you've got this, you know, little hub bit that you can go to instead. Or when you're moving between classes, I like to take this route because I find that that's, you know, a bit easier for me. Or just kind of generally giving them the lowdown and letting them know that there are other autistic kids there, you know, there are people that they can go to, there are others who have been through that experience and they're thriving. Can be really important, can't it?
It's powerful, that, yeah. And
Yeah,
I think sometimes, mentoring, peer mentoring can be really handy. And we know that a lot of places do peer mentoring whenever they are moving children to new settings. You know, we see P7 kids supporting them, the wee ones, and primary school and primary one. We've seen, you know, S5, S6 people supporting the S1 students as well. But sometimes some autistic people really benefit from having that mentor for a little while longer, a peer mentor. I know a couple of primary one autistic pupils who ended up having their P7 buddy for most of P1, to be honest, because they really enjoyed it and they got an awful lot out of it. And as long as the P7 buddy is totally fine with that, then brilliant, that's great. But a mentor can also be an adult, someone that they can check in with. And in some schools, we've seen schemes where, and I've seen this in tertiary education as well, in universities, where an autistic student might have a member of staff that they maybe don't have as a class teacher at any point. They're maybe not even the guidance teacher, but there's someone that they can go to that they can sort of have a little check-in every once in a while. We've seen it in businesses as well, where quite often the mentor is someone who's not attached to that particular team, maybe don't work on the same project, but can provide just a little bit of mentoring and support. And then if you do have to go into any meetings where you're talking about any issues, there is anything that needs to be sorted out, then the mentor can always be there to help out and help to advocate if necessary as well. But someone that can have a little check-in. And it might be that whenever they're starting in a new setting or they've started a new academic year, they maybe want to check in maybe once every couple of days, once a week. But it's possible that as time goes on, that might drop back to once a month, once a term. But if they start going through a harder time, they might want to build that back up again. So having that flexibility in there if they need it can be really handy. And an environmental checklist. I mean, one of the first things that we did as an organisation was to develop an environmental checklist so that autistic people, their families and school staff can go around and the areas that the autistic student will be using and think, how is this area working? How does it match up with their sensory needs? What's good practice here, and how can we make some small adjustments so that their needs are being met? And thank you for popping that into there. You're on the ball today, aren't you? But it's free to download off of our website, and you can use that alongside the family, alongside the autistic student, so that they can see what it is that's going on with them. And it's a good idea to do the environmental checklist before somebody comes into your classroom, and then have a wee check, sort of maybe a week or two later, a few weeks later, and say, right, so you suggested that you maybe want these fidget tools, you maybe wanted to sit there. Is this seat still working for you? Is this still going to be the best? Do you want to try anywhere else? Is there anything else that can be done? And just keeping that conversation open to make sure that those flexible needs are being recognised and supported.
Yeah.
Anything you'd add there, Flick?
No, I think that's really important to remember. And I've been having some questions coming through as well. So what I'll do is I can read those out anonymously after the presentation, as well as part of the Q&A to answer those.
Brilliant. Our next couple of slides, it's a little bit more detailed, kind of step by step. So I don't think we need to go through absolutely everything, because everybody will get a copy of these slides. And some of it really is quite repetitive by the time we get to the second, third slide. But we can say, here's some of the things that we would recommend for nursery, and then for each of the stages, we would recommend sort of doing similar and then sort of adding some things as well. But asking the pupil for their input on what would help is always the best idea for starting out. And I remember when I was doing my teacher training, going into a nursery, and I had this idea for what we would do for this beautiful big wall display, which is for the lighthouse keeper's lunch. And I had this idea for what the rocks would be like for the lighthouse to be sitting on. And one of the wee nursery students completely schooled me and said, no, Miss Linton, we're making rocks like this. And you know what? Their idea was better than mine. So I think quite a lot at the time, and it was brilliant, it looked amazing whenever it was finished. But a lot of the time, young students, they deserve more credit than we give them an awful lot of the time. And the same goes for autistic students as well. Very often people will make assumptions about autistic people, about what it is that they need, what's best for them. We've known some schools that have heard that, this student has just been diagnosed autistic or just formally identified as autistic, and then they'll go out and spend 50 quid on a bit of equipment that didn't never use it. And if they just had a 2-minute conversation with the family, then they would have saved themselves quite a significant amount of money. So speaking to the pupil first and seeing what it is that they really want is just the best start. Photos taken by the child or featuring the child can really help. A video welcome from the key worker. So if you're the one who's going to be working with the child, a small video saying, "Hi, Ailey, my name's Alison, and my name's Mrs. McLaughlin, and I'm going to be working with you when you come into nursery, and I'm really excited to see you. We're going to have fun doing this, and that." Something small like that can just make a real big difference, and then they can watch it over the summer holidays before or over the holidays before they start, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And a book made by current nursery pupils, that can be really, really beautiful as well, and something that, again, you can sort of discuss what sort of information in that book would be really useful to have for that individual child. But yeah, generally kind of liaisoning with the family and the child, as well as any other professionals that are actually involved currently, to get an up-to-date idea of what information and strategies are likely to help them, because yeah, we won't all need those same things. We've already talked about how advanced visits are so important, haven't we? And that's going to be the case every step along the way, if possible. Put into place those advanced visits, as many of them as might be needed, and you might need to kind of start earlier with those kinds of visits than you would for some of the peers as well. So making sure that you're planning that in ahead of time. Plenty of time for questions, because yeah, we like all the questions, and again, building in that downtime, like we said as well. Comfort items to aid the transition as well. I think a lot of this is stuff that we've already kind of put into place. It's just us kind of showing you how it can work every step along the way, isn't it?
I think, well, one of the things that we will sometimes hear from schools is, how can I explain to the class that it's okay for Flick to bring in a toy from home every day, but it's not okay for everybody else to bring in a toy from home? And we totally get, having been a teacher myself, I completely get how that can be a tricky conversation to be having. But I think the way that we quite often answer it is, does everybody need glasses? Does everybody need a wheelchair? Does everybody need crutches? Does everybody need sort of, like a film to help them with their dyslexia? We give people what it is that they need to succeed. So it's okay that Flick needs to bring in a toy from home, because that gives her an awful lot of emotional support, and maybe you don't need it. So it's all right if they do need something different. And it's not always that the autistic person needs more support than other people. It's just kind of sometimes that they need different supports. Again, I mean, we've met some P1 kids who are doing the same kind of maths as you would expect for someone, just shortly before they're going into P7. We've said not all autistic kids by any stretch of the imagination. It's the same with reading. So maybe they're actually able to do some things with less support than others. They just need different kinds of support in different areas. So it's okay if we get that. And we do also know that for some students, especially whenever they're going into starting nursery, some autistic kids might be speaking a bit less than their peers, if they're speaking at all. And non-speaking isn't the most common within the autistic community, but some might have situational mutism, where they might talk at home, but they might not talk whenever they're in a different setting. So that's where it's really important to communicate with the family, let the child see that you are somebody who is a safe person, give them sort of, low arousal areas so that it's easier for them, so that they're not quite so overwhelmed, and offering opportunities in different kinds of ways. So they don't always have to be speaking whenever they're sort of indicating that they want something. So do they communicate using sign? Have they been using sort of a pictorial system? Have they got, word mats? Have they got other different ways that they can be communicating some of these things? And I think a lot of the body language that you can get from some autistics, we don't always smile whenever we're really, really happy. We don't always, jump up and down whenever we're really excited about something, but we might gravitate towards something. We might sort of spend more time. We might really examine it, and that could be how you know that something really works for them and that they like it. And if they're running away from it with their hands over their ears or their hands over their eyes or something, then it's a pretty good indication that it's not something that they're very comfortable with, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, that's where I think that, sorry, Flick, go on.
No, yeah, I was just going to say that all behavior is communication at the end of the day. So, trying to force one specific kind of communication on a child, whether that is, spoken language, or whether it's like, no, but you have to use your, your pecs or something to get them to respond to something. Well, if they were communicating already that they, didn't want a certain meal by pushing it away, then why do they need to use those pecs? Why do they need to use that specific word? They've already communicated to you, and that was the whole point of, the spoken word or the card or whatever in the first place, was to allow them to communicate something to you. So if they are communicating something to you, it doesn't really matter how they're doing it, as long as it's not harmful for anybody, including them. It just matters that they are able to communicate to you.
Yeah. I think that transition sort of between nursery to primary and between classes, I have seen, some fantastic transitions where the people, the nursery might spend one like hour a week, or maybe like 10 minutes a day in the corridor that they're going to be in, sort of seeing the people, getting to know them. And if the nursery is attached to the school, then it'd be quite easy to do those kind of transitions. And it doesn't necessarily need to be during their regular nursery time if that is not a time that's going to work for them. So speaking to them about, can they come in like a little bit early? Can they stay a little bit later? So that they can get that done at a time that really does work for them. Maths as well. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily, I know a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think about maths for P1 kids, but some love a good map, especially if they've had a hand in drawing it as well. Then that's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm one of those autistic people that I could get lost in a phone box, which is a joke that's becoming less and less relevant, but hopefully most of you here will know what a phone box is. So yeah, even quite a small primary school for me when I was a kid was quite daunting as well. So anything that helped with that was quite big for me.
Absolutely. And again, everybody will get a copy of these slides, so don't worry about taking screeds and screeds of notes of what's on there. And again, sort of the primary to secondary, photos, videos made by the pupil, video from guidance, so from some of the staff, so then they can see them. And I think it could be really handy to ask the primary school as well, what's worked when they transitioned from P5 to P6, from P6 to P7? What kind of information was really useful? What did they need? How did you make those transitions work? So then you can get them maps with the toilets in their classroom clearly marked, because there are so many toilets in some of the secondary schools and they're all over the place. And a lot of autistic people don't always know that they need to go to the toilet until they need to go to the toilet. So sometimes we really need to know which corridor that good toilet is in as soon as possible, so that we can run as fast as the teacher is letting us out, isn't it? But knowing sort of in advance what do these toilets, do they smell okay? Are they, is there a lot of disinfectant-y kind of smell? Are they close to the dinner hall? Am I going to get smells from there as well? So it's good to get some of these things sort of put in. I think liaising with other professionals that might be currently working with the pupil can be a really good idea. Not every autistic person knows that they're gonna that they are autistic whenever they're sort of moving up to secondary school, but they might be in the process of going through the assessment. So whoever else is working with them could be really, really handy. And buddying up, like, again, I know we've kind of mentioned it before, but it does bear repeating, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, that's a really useful one. And it can really provide that that same communication style that we're using, because you're communicating with a peer, with another autistic individual, so that can be massive.
So the secondary and beyond is from secondary to afterwards is a really, really big one. And I remember my own transition out. It was very much, you're going to university, good luck. And that was kind of what we were given. I think we had one former pupil come in to sort of have a little bit of chat about their experiences at university. But at that point, I wasn't even sure if I did want to go or not. And I don't really think I paid as much attention as I would do, because I wasn't convinced that it was going to be relevant for me. So why should I pay attention? So, making sure that you are given the information that's related to them as an individual, and again, can they sort of go up and spend some time on campus if that's what they're doing? If they're moving on to a job, giving them some time so that they can go and, visit that job site, get them used to it before they go in, and helping them to sort of figure out what on earth is it that they actually do want to do, and having realistic expectations about what it is that they do want to do. Are they stretching themselves enough? Are they trying to stretch themselves too far? So having sort of, conversations about what they are capable of, and making sure that they are stretching themselves as much as possible without burning themselves out. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of this stuff is adaptable as you go through all the different stages and transitions. So again, kind of advanced visits and all this kind of stuff is really important.
Very much so. But what do we do if the pupil hasn't been in school before the transition? So we know that traditionally people have talked about school refusal, but we tend to talk about it. They're not refusing school, they're not refusing education. They might be refusing to put themselves into a place that they don't feel safe. And actually, that's good advocacy. That is kind of what we want to see. But it could be emotionally based school avoidance, and it could happen for a whole number of different reasons. I mean, that's an entire topic that we could spend 2 hours talking about just by itself. But if you're in a position where next academic year or sort of later on this term, someone in the school comes to you and says, okay, we're going to get Jack starting next week or so, here are some of the things that you can do. And we are going to have a little look at a case study and what can happen. But I think taking a really trauma-informed approach is very, very key when you're working, because there are reasons why they haven't been in school potentially for a significant amount of time, possibly years. And it's not necessarily because they just really love education other than school. It could be that they felt forced out of school in the first place, or they had some really negative experiences. So that's why talking about why school has been inaccessible in the first place is a really, really important one. So then you're armed with that knowledge of why they weren't able to go in. So then you can then reassure that trauma won't be repeated. And we do sometimes see sort of people saying, well, why don't we just get them in and we'll see what happens, and then we'll take it from there. We'll deal with problems as they come up. That might work for some people, but for a lot of autistic people who've got a trauma background, that's about the worst thing that people can say to us, because that just makes us feel incredibly unsafe. And like the trauma that we've been through doesn't matter. Am I right there, Flip?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you do need to remember that it really is trauma, and that's key. And I think that helping the pupils to understand their rights, and I was just finding there our link to the rights section that we have on our website as well, because autistic people do actually have a bunch of rights under law that are different to what you might expect, and a lot of us don't know about what those rights are. So really helping your pupils to understand what their actual rights are in the first place can be really key to helping them to deal with some of that trauma, to understand why it won't be repeated again. Look, no, it's okay, because you have these legal rights actually, and so we do have these responsibilities to you, and reassuring them that way can be really key, can't it? And it can kind of show them that you are taking those concerns seriously as well.
I mean, almost every school that we go into has the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child up on the wall somewhere. But how many schools have you been into, Flick, that have got the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities up?
Never. I've not seen that.
And that's just as relevant legislation for us as disabled people as the UNCRC is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
so 10 points to the first school in Aberdeen that has that up, if there's not one already. And supporting the people to advocate for what they need as they move forward. And there's lots of different ways that you can support people with advocacy. So there are independent advocates like Advocacy Services Aberdeen, who do have members of staff who are specifically there for autistic people. But for pupils aged 12 to 15, there's also My Rights, My Say. And these can be really, really important places. And, a mentor could potentially be used for advocacy as well. Their family might be wanting to advocate for what it is that they need, but giving them that space to say what it is that they need. A lot of places as well, we've seen, not just in schools, but in businesses and other organizations as well. What one thing can we do to make it accessible? And it's never just about one thing, is it, Flick?
No, it's absolutely not. It's making sure that lots of different needs are actually being met.
Mm-hmm. And there's no sort of hierarchy of if it's a need, then it's a need. So that's really important. Supporting the people to understand and support their needs as an autistic person is really key as well. A lot of the autistic people that we've supported, especially whenever it comes, if they don't find out that they're autistic until puberty is hitting, it can be really difficult for them to accept that they've got different needs in the first place, and then actually go ahead and support those needs. And this is something that we see within autistic adults as well. If you manage to get to the age of 50 without supporting your sensory needs at all, then why do you need to support them now? Well, because you'll have a better quality of life, really. If you know what your needs are and you're supporting them, then it is actually going to really massively improve your quality of life. So you might have more energy outside of school to enjoy things that your peers are enjoying that you maybe really would want to. Do you want to go to that dance class that you've been eyeing up for ages? Do you want to go to Boys Brigade, but you just haven't had enough energy because you're so sapped after school because you've been masking, because you've not been supporting your needs? If you're going home and having meltdowns or shutdowns every day, then that's not ideal for you or anybody else. So understanding that it's okay to have different needs to other people, that those needs deserve to be met, and that there are ways to meet those needs that you can do in the classroom, then that makes a huge, big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's very validating as well, because and a lot of us don't really realize we have those differences until we actually have it pointed out to us a little bit, and then it can be really useful to support them. The sensory profile and the environmental checklist can both be found in our downloadable documents section there on the website, which I've popped the link into the chat earlier on. Making sure that all these supports are put into place before the transition takes place rather than after the child is already actually struggling is just so important.
Yeah, I think so often autistic people are told that we need to see a need for something before we can put something into place. But why do we have to be traumatized in some situations? Why do we have to sort of put ourselves in situations where we feel unsafe in order to get the support that we require? And it's far better to put in support that's not needed and then slowly take it back than it is to sort of throw us in at the deep end and then expect us to swim. Because that's going to
fail, isn't it? So
yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, autistic people can be not just in education, but we find it, out in the communities as well, and even within some homes too, where children are expected to fail, and autistic adults can be expected to fail, and then support is put in. But let's try and put that support in before anybody gets to crisis point, before they get to the stage that they're refusing to go to school, or they're unable to go to school, or they're developing a phobia about going to school. And that's far more supportive for the student, and it's far less disruptive. It's better for the staff. It's better for whenever you have, the inspector then as well. It's just better for everybody all around, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just a couple left. So before the transition back into school, here's some of the things that might really, really help. Flexibility with the timetable. Do they need to be in full time? Now, it's possible that they might really want to be, and that's great, but it's possible that they might only feel comfortable coming in for a couple of subjects. So they might only think, right, well, maybe I just want to come in for art and English, or maths and music. And starting out with just one or two subjects can be a way of building up. There's been families that we've supported where they maybe went in for 2 or 3 subjects. And then once they were in the school building, they decided, actually, do you know what? I quite fancy going to French with my friends today. So I'm going to do that. And then sometimes these things happen quite spontaneously because they're in a space that they're feeling comfortable enough to do it. So these leaps forward can be made an awful lot easier if we don't feel that pressure on us to do that. I mean, as soon as somebody tells me that I have to do something, I mean, Flick, my automatic response is, no, I don't. So fewer demands can make it an awful lot more accessible. And that's where flexibility with the uniform can come in too, can't it?
Yeah, but we have those different sensory needs. So sometimes a full school uniform is actually not going to be accessible for us at all. And if we're already going into an environment that we're struggling with, that has previously traumatized us, then actually our sensory needs might be heightened at that point. So we might struggle even more than usual. Maybe before that pupil was able to wear a shirt and tie, and now they're saying they can't. Well, you know what? Believe them, and they don't need to wear a shirt and tie. Actually, it's not going to affect their education if they're not wearing a shirt and tie. Can they wear jogging bottoms or leggings instead of black school trousers? Well, yeah, actually they can. There's really no reason that they can. And if that's going to make education accessible for them, then that's absolutely what needs to happen. So yeah, having flexibility with uniform can be making that environment just that bit more accessible for them an awful lot of the time. And also flexibility around assessments as well, because again, there's sometimes this misconception that legally all children have to be sitting these really formal assessments, and especially when they're returning to school, well, we need to judge what level the child is at, so that we can give them the right education. Well, actually, those assessments can be ongoing. Those assessments can be really subtle. Those assessments can be the teachers who are working with them just kind of taking some notes of how they're getting on with different subjects and things. It doesn't need to be them sitting in a room with a timer and kind of going in a high pressure situation, sitting and going through certain questions or anything like that. So yeah, having flexibility in lots of areas is really key. Flexibility on where tasks are completed as well. Do they need to be completed inside a stuffy classroom, or can they be completed whilst you're going for a walk through the local woods or something? Does PE need to happen in an echoey gym hall, or can that actually be happening kind of outside somewhere, or maybe in a sensory room or something that's going to be a bit better suited to that child? So a lot of it comes down to having that flexibility, doesn't it?
And that really does make a big difference, especially if you have someone who's got a demand avoidant profile. So if somebody's MPDA, then these things can make a tremendous difference into whether or not they are able to get across that door and into school. But another thing that we have supported some pupils in doing with some schools is a personalised curriculum. So they might be really keen to be learning, but that's where using those special interests can be really, really handy. So one particular student that we know was really into Korea, was to learn everything that there is to know about Korea. So they are learning how to make some Korean food. They're learning to speak a little bit of Korean. They're looking at Korean culture. They're sort of reading books about Korea. They're looking at maps. So they're able to do a whole multidisciplinary topic around it. But they were able to choose the topic. They were able to choose some of the lessons on what that's going to look like. They're able to have some choice and control on how they present that information as well, which gives them much more autonomy over their tasks and the content. That makes it far easier for them to be engaged in it and get that real sense of accomplishment. And again, once you've got that in one area, it becomes a lot easier to be motivated to get that in other areas too. We are almost finished. I think, yeah, we've got some really good questions. So I think we've just got a couple of more slides, and then we're really looking forward to getting stuck into some of those questions. Yeah. Regular check-ins with the mentor. I think we've kind of covered that, haven't we?
Yeah, I think that we've sort of already emphasized that one, but also regular contact with the family, because quite often if that child has been out of education, if the pupil's not been in school, especially physically in school, a lot of the time that means they've spent a lot of time in the family home, and a lot of the time that the family are going to be the people that you need to speak to figure out what their needs are. It might be that they're quite anxious. It might be that mum or dad is their main advocate, and that's the person that they actually want sort of voicing any concerns that they have, that's the person that they want speaking for them in school meetings and things. And sometimes there can be the temptation, I think, especially in secondary school, to be saying, no, the parents need to be taking a step back here actually, and the child needs to be doing more. But is that young person saying that they want to be advocating for themselves, or are they actually telling you, no, can you talk to mum, can you talk to dad please, about this, because they know what my needs are. So regularly checking in with the family can be a really key one as well.
Absolutely. And I think so many autistic pupils have got autistic families. So many autistic pupils will have an autistic mum, dad, both. And it's possible that if their child has been out of education for a significant amount of time, then they're going to have an awful lot of anxiety around their pupil being back and what's it look like. So having those check-ins with the family will just help to reassure them, which will then in turn reassure the child as well. So again, it's time well spent with the whole family, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Let's see. So again, we've got a case study. Here's Gerald, who is 14. He's been out of education for a year. He is very keen to return to secondary school after the summer holidays. So what is it that you would be doing to be supporting Gerald? And
Again,
yeah, feel free to use our chat. I think a lot of the things that we've talked about already would be quite handy, but yeah.
Yeah, especially if you have any kind of new ideas. But yeah, asking Gerald what he wants, that is absolutely key, definitely.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, what is it that he wants to study whenever he goes in? Why does he want to study it as well?
Yeah, is he
getting
thinking that this is a career he's interested in? Is this a special interest for him? Is this something he's been really enjoying whilst he's not been at school? So what's that motivation there? What motivation would you be giving Gerald by kind of fitting these things in? Video walkthrough of the school and sort of meeting the pupils on video as well. Absolutely. Getting to see that.
Go straight into full time or not? Yeah, that makes such a big difference, doesn't it? A video walkthrough. Yeah. Conversations about situations that raise anxiety and what can be done to ease those. That's a great idea as well. Yeah. Yeah. What are those triggers and how do you best manage those as well? Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, is he going back full time or is he or not? Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I know some schools who said, right, school finishes at 3:30. Why don't you come in at 4:45 when everybody's sort of dispersed? So it'll be a little bit quieter. You can have a look around, see what it looks like before there's people in it, or coming in before anybody else is in the morning. Yeah, come in beforehand sessions and visits. Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes on in-service days, there's an option as well for, a child to go in when it's not going to be busy with lots of other kids as well. If you've got a staff member who's going to be free to kind of do a tour with them, then that can be a good time to allow them that as well.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm conscious I want to make sure that we've got time for those questions as well. So we've just got some last kind of key takeaways. So I think in good teacher tradition, we've always wanted to sum up the learning for the day as well. Transitions can be something that autistic pupils may need more support with. And different autistic pupils are going to need different supports, and we're all unique. So we're going to need something that is maybe not the same as what we've done before. We do quite often hear as well, well, no other autistic student I've known has needed this. Well, that's okay. It's possible there's other autistic students that you didn't know they were autistic, to be honest. Yeah. Ensure there's plenty of time to ask questions and, repeat that time again. So, you might have time for questions 1 week, but maybe you want to revisit that and see if they've got any more. Like, do you want to take those last two?
Yeah.
If your thoughts okay.
Yeah, including that pupil every step of the way as well. You know, is this something that they're going to benefit from? Is there something else that would be working for them better? You know, making sure you are checking in with them, and just remembering that school phobia can influence transitions and does require that trauma-informed approach, because chances are, if they've been out of education for a while, there's a good chance that they were probably traumatized by that setting previously, and so you do need to remember that when you're actually communicating with them.
I will stop the recording just now then. Thank you for everyone who's watching on the recording, because we know some of you had to leave a wee bit early, which is totally cool.